Hi guys, welcome to Yoga Anatomy for Beginners. My name is Drew. Welcome to the channel. If it's your first time here, it's great to see you. If you're interested in anatomy in yoga, if you'd like to learn more about how the body works in exercise and in movement, then this video is designed for you. So welcome. So we're going to look at today what's called reciprocal inhibition, and this is a really cool kind of way the body works neurologically, and it's really important in stretching, and we do a lot of stretching in asana. Essentially most asana is either static stretching where you're just holding the position, or that's kind of moving dynamic stretching where you're moving in and out of a different posture or a shape or a position, and then you hold and breathe and stretch. So you kind of either static holding or you're moving in and out, then you're pausing and holding depending on the style of yoga you're teaching or practicing. Either way, the reciprocal inhibition is a really important kind of part of the stretching and the way the muscles work in exercise. So it's really good to have an appreciation of it, and when you understand how their muscles work, you'll then kind of get a bit more of an understanding then of how to apply that in your asana practice. And it'll kind of explain some of the techniques that we employ when we're doing stretching. So like when you hold a stretch, or when you're holding and you're squeezing a muscle then relaxing, what's happening in the body when you do these things. So let's have a look, shall we? So we're going to jump into some slides. Reciprocal inhibition. So we're just going to get some of the definitions kind of nailed down first. So autogenic, we basically have two. We've got autogenic and then we've got reciprocal inhibition. And they're both two types of stretch reflexes. So a stretch reflex is basically the muscle gets tensioned, so like you're stretching it or you're contracting it, that sends a signal to the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord bounces the signal back to the muscle to either like contract it to tighten it up more or to relax it. So depending on what the body's doing and what's happening in the environment. So this happens via these stretch sensors that are embedded in the muscle. So we've got stretch sensors in individual muscle fibers, kind of like little wires that wrap around the muscle fibers. And as the muscle fiber gets tension, it's kind of like sensing the amount of tension that's in the muscle fibers. And then you've got stretch sensors in the tendons as well. So when the tendons get stretched or tensioned, they're sending signals back to the spinal cord. So we've got Golgi tendon organs, and then we've got stretch reflex sensors in the muscles themselves. So these two sensors that are really feeding back to the spinal cord about tension, position, pressure that's coming into the muscles. So when we look at autogenic versus reciprocal inhibition, really what they're doing is autogenic inhibition is just kind of like the stretch signals coming from the muscle you're contracting or tensioning to the spinal cord and then back to the same muscle. Whereas reciprocal inhibition is the muscle that you contract sends a signal back to the spinal cord, and then it sends a signal back towards what's called the antagonist or opposite muscle to relax. And so we're going to explain how those two work and then how you can use that in asana practice. So let's kind of break down autogenic inhibition a little bit. Autogenic inhibition or autogenic inhibition relaxation is the ability of a muscle to relax while it experiences a stretched or increased tension. All right, so while you experience a stretch or increased tension. Here both stretch and relaxation occur in the same muscle. Due to the autogenic inhibition, a reduction in the excitability of a contracting or stretched muscle takes place. The Golgi tendon organ in muscles feed back to the central nervous system, so the spinal cord. So let's kind of like break this down, some of the terms here. So autogenic, so automatic. So this is happening automatically. You don't have a lot of control over it in terms of you can actually specifically isolate the stretch reflex to the individual fibers. It's like we're not that sensitive. And it happens so fast and so quick, and it's happening everywhere in the body, like it's just too much for you to actually take conscious manual control over to control everything that's happening. All right, so it's just a lot of, if you think about all the different muscles that are active and they're all kind of like sensing and contracting, relaxing. And then if you were trying to like manually take that over, you wouldn't really get much done. It's kind of too complex for conscious control. So a lot of these things happen kind of in the background, but what we can do is we can then take over, specifically in muscle groups and positions, and then bring in that conscious control. So we've always got this kind of dual play of like cognitive function, prefrontal cortex stuff, where you're driving the wheel, if you will, and then all the kind of the bottom-up feedback, so more kind of brainstem area where the signals are coming out and you're not really having much control or say of what's going on like that. So inhibition. So when you inhibit something, particularly when we're talking about neurology and like excitability of the muscles. So when a muscle contracts, it requires an electrical signal to come down the nerve into what's called the motor unit. And then when an electrical signal hits that motor unit, it will contract all the muscle fibers connected to that motor unit. So when you inhibit that, you basically decrease the amount of signals or the strength of the signals coming down from the spinal column, the spinal cord, out to the muscles. So in that way, you decrease the contractibility or the amount of muscle fibers that are contracting, and so then they can relax. Because if the muscle's not contracting, it's basically coming back to its normal resting position. Okay. So when we go automatically relax or inhibit, so what the body's doing is it's doing this really fine-tuning modulation of how much tension, how much contraction of each individual muscle is required to do the job. Not too much, not too little, just enough. It's kind of like this special K rule. It just wants just enough, and it's always fine-tuning, 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 fine-tuning. One of the awesome things about yoga practice is that we really help facilitate this fine-tuning of this kind of neurological control of the muscles. So a lot of the benefits from yoga is really us fine-tuning the nervous system and the muscular system working together, which is super cool. So when we stretch a muscle, what we tend to do is that there's kind of two things that really happen. There's the actual fibers, the elastic property of the fibers. They kind of like a rubber band, they get pulled apart a little bit, so you get that stretch of the individual fibers. But then you've also get the muscle fibers cross-bridging and lengthening across each other. So generally, like you'll have two fibers connect together, and then when you contract, they slide across, and then when you relax, they slide back to resting position, and then when you're stretching a little bit further out. So you've got these two different ways that muscles stretch. There's the stretching property of the muscle, and then there's just the natural lengthening of the tissue. So when we're doing the autogenic inhibition, we're just facilitating this lengthening of the tissue, of the cross-bridging of the muscle fibers. Long-term flexibility comes from fine-tuning this relaxation of the tissue, so the cross-bridging, lengthening, but also then you actually then grow longer sarcomeres. So the sarcomeres are like little sections of the muscles, so you get longer in them. So that's more of a long-term adaptation to flexibility training or yoga asana. So if actually getting more stretchy is a goal, developing that kind of growth in the tissue, the lengthening of the sarcomeres, is one of the long-term goals, and that does take time because you've basically got to like build the protein strands up, and that process is just a slow, long process, and then the proteins then develop tensile strength so they can resist the forces coming into it. So then in autogenic inhibition, we're also then really working on the same muscle that we're stretching. So if I'm going to do like a shoulder stretch, or I pull my arm across and I'm focusing on the deltoid muscle here, as I pull the arm across, I'm lengthening those deltoid muscle fibers, and the Golgi tendon organs, which are connected to the tendon of the deltoid, is going to be tensioned, and that's going to send feedback to the spinal cord about how much tension force is coming into that section of muscle there. Essentially, the body's always trying to maintain safety, and it's trying to protect the integrity of the soft tissue structure, so you don't want any damage. So if the tendon is sensing that there's no initial threat to the muscle or the tendon, then it will then go, okay, we can go a little bit further and we can let you relax a little bit further out. If it detects for whatever reason that there is potential threat or potential damage, so you might micro tearing of the fibers, something like that, then what will happen is it will initiate a contraction of the muscle to stop you moving any further, or potentially more inhibition where it will relax, so it'll try to take the tension off. Either way, if we go in nice and slow with our stretching, it gives the Golgi tendon organs a lot of time to figure out whether it's too much or not enough, and then it can kind of modulate that stretch response in the muscle that we're stretching. So if I'm stretching that deltoid, it's going to allow it to go a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further, a little bit further. If we go too quickly, too fast, what you can do is it'll initiate a contraction to stop you moving, and so then you can pull muscles, because then you get this kind of reflex contraction, and then the muscle gets these reflex contractions can be quite strong, and then that in itself can actually then potentially damage the muscle, pull a fiber, those kind of things. So we want to be aware of those. So when you're in your asana and you're stretching, you want to create this kind of mind-muscle connection. So think about which muscle that you're trying to lengthen in the asana, in the stretch. And if you know which muscle is really the target stretching muscle, then you can kind of, on the exhale, which tends to be more relaxing to the system, okay, a long exhale is more parasympathetically orientated, so it's more relaxing to the system, so neurologically it's going to calm you down, you won't be as excited, and that'll help facilitate the muscle to actually relax and lengthen into that position. And it'll lengthen out to the safe end range of movement, meaning that it'll take it out to the position where the muscle is lengthened but under control and is safe, is not going to create any micro damage. All right. Now if we look at the next one, reciprocal inhibition, here we have the agonist antagonist muscles. Reciprocal inhibition relaxation is a relaxation of muscles on one side of a joint to accommodate contraction of the other side of that joint. It's a big mouthful, right? It involves a relaxation of the antagonist muscle followed by the stretching of the agonist muscle. In reciprocal inhibition, increased tension of the agonist muscle causes the reflex relaxation of the antagonist or opposite muscle. So let's have a look at some of the terms here so we can kind of get more understanding of the terms. So agonist means the primary muscle. It's the main muscle that's doing the work, or it's the focus. So in the deltoid example here, when I'm stretching across the deltoid, that muscle is going to be the agonist in that stretch. Now if I contract that deltoid by pushing back, so if I try to bring my arm across my body, that's going to engage or initiate those deltoid fibers to contract. So that becomes the agonist muscle. The antagonist muscle are any muscles on the opposite side that will do the opposite movement. So here we need to have a bit more of an anatomy understanding of what muscles do what, and we'll get to that in future videos. In this case, if I'm bringing my arm across my body this way, what we call horizontal abduction, right, then the muscles that bring my arm back across the center, so primarily my chest muscles, is horizontal adduction. All right. So when I do this action, and if I push into my arm and I'm trying to bring my arm across like this, it's going to relax my chest muscle. Okay. So we can use that to facilitate more stretch in my chest. All right. So how do we do that? So if I want to stretch my chest, I bring my arm out this way. Okay, so I'm in more of this kind of position. Okay. If I squeeze my deltoid muscle here, so I pull my arm back, squeeze, so I'm starting to open up my chest, then relax that squeeze, we'll get a signal to the deltoid muscle, to the chest muscles, the pecs here, and they will relax, and then I can take that stretch further. All right. So It just requires a little bit more of an understanding of what muscles are doing what. And then if you have that understanding, you can then build that into your asana practice. So when in future videos, when we go into, so for example, when we're in down dog, what muscles are contracting? If you know what muscles are contracting to like stabilize your legs, your hips, then we'll know that then the opposite muscles will be relaxing. So when you're trying to push your heels down into the floor, for example, to stretch out the back of your calves in down dog, all right, the opposite muscles of the calves are going to be the front shin muscles, the tibialis anterior. So if we kind of like consciously try to squeeze those muscles, then fully relax them, we'll be able to sink a little bit deeper into that kind of down dog position, which is kind of the benefit of knowing your anatomy when you're in different positions. So we can use this kind of understanding of reciprocal inhibition in a really cool way to help facilitate deeper stretching. So for example, in this picture here, we're in our full forward fold. We've got our quadriceps here. If we contract the quadriceps, okay, this muscle here, there'll be a signal that goes to the spinal cord, and then from the spinal cord there'll be another signal that goes to the brain, and there'll be then a reflex signal that comes from the spinal cord to the hamstring, which is the opposite muscle of the quad. That's the antagonist, and that will relax that muscle. So in a forward fold, once you get into position, if you focus on squeezing your quad, which is essentially trying to straighten your knee, you squeeze, you hold that for a few seconds, then you consciously relax that muscle, you will notice that you'll get a deeper stretch in this back muscle here in the hamstring. And you can repeat that. You can contract, relax, then stretch. Contract, relax, then stretch. And that way we're kind of introducing the two different stretch responses. So if we contract this muscle on its own and then relax, then this quadricep muscle will get a relaxation after the squeeze here. So you can kind of then help kind of relax that muscle, or you can contract it, then relax, and then you'll get this reciprocal inhibition here of this muscle. So let's jump into our complete anatomy app, and let's have a look at the quad muscle in a bit more detail. So here we go, we've got our skeleton guy, and we've got our quad muscle. This is the rectus, this is the vastus intermedius. This is one of the 4 quad muscles. And then this one here, we've got the vastus medialis. If we put another layer on top of it, here we've got the quadricep muscle here, the rectus femoris. So let's isolate rectus femoris. Okay, so this muscle here, rectus femoris, is one of the 4 quads. When it contracts, it attaches onto the shin bone here and onto the pelvis up here. So if the pelvis is nice and stable here and it contracts, it creates a pull, and the tendon attaches onto the bone, so it's going to pull on this bone here, and it's going to move the leg forward into what we call knee extension. So that's extension, so that's straightening the leg. Okay. When the quadricep relaxes, we are able to bend the knee into knee flexion. So the hamstrings are going to be on the back here. So in reciprocal inhibition, if we want to stretch the hamstrings, for example, my computer's decided to go a bit slow. If we straighten the leg out, orange is contracting, so that's going to send the signal to the spinal cord, and then we're going to stretch reflex to the hamstrings, and that reflex will then relax the hamstring, and it will allow you to get the leg straight. So that's kind of how the stretch reflex works, this agonist-antagonist relationship. So what if we go back, we put the hamstrings in the picture. turn around. Okay, so we've got the hamstrings here. So we've got semitendinosus and bicep femoris. And then underneath semitendinosus there we've got semimembranosus, which is the hamstring. So there are 3 hamstring muscles. Together they make the hamstring group. So let's just have a look at the bicep femoris. Doing the same or the opposite action of the rectus femoris. So here we have the knees getting bent or knee flexion. So we're getting a strong pull here. We've got the attachment pulling on the lateral aspect of the tibia, and it's pulling the heel up towards your butt in what's called knee flexion. So when the hamstring contracts here, pause, okay, the quadricep, which is on the front, will be relaxed. So it has to relax, because if the quadricep is contracting here and the hamstring contracts, then you'll get no movement. So it's kind of how the body works. If you want to move a limb, the spinal cord will coordinate the movement with just enough kind of contractility in both muscles to allow the movement to happen with control and stability. So that's that kind of neurological coordination piece. So when we're doing yoga, particularly if you do a really good sequence of yoga, you're training pretty much all the movement patterns. You're training pretty much all of the different positions, different muscle groups, and so you fine-tuning all these really, really important movements that occur in yoga. So neurologically, well, I think one of the most underrated benefits of your yoga practices is this fine-tuning of the neuromuscular system. Okay? So you get this coordination. And a lot of kind of injuries and conditions are just really an imbalance of the musculoskeletal system. So let me explain that. So if we come back to our complete anatomy app here, just consider if our hamstring muscle was weak and our quad muscles were super tight and very, very strong. What will happen is that the balance between the front muscle and the back muscle, the hamstring versus the quad, that'll get out of balance. And if the quad's too active, because of that reciprocal inhibition, it'll be neurologically inhibiting the hamstring a lot. So if it's overactive, and we're not training and developing the hamstring, what we can do is create this kind of neuromuscular imbalance. So what that means then is that neuromuscularly, you're not going to get as much joint stabilization in the knee and as much joint stabilization in the hip. And so then you get this kind of misalignment of joint movement. So the joint doesn't contract, doesn't glide and slide as smoothly as it could possibly do. And that potentially can create some injuries or dysfunction or just poor movement mechanics, which potentially could be manifest as pain. And so long term, we can get these conditions that happen where certain muscles are really, really active or hypertonic, other muscles are underactive or hypotonic, and you get this imbalance, and then the whole musculoskeletal system gets out of whack. A really good yoga practice retrains that whole balance, which is super cool, and that's part of that inhibition, reciprocal inhibition. So let's have a look here. So when you're training and you're doing yoga, essentially you've got these 2 stretching techniques. So you go into a position and you hold the stretch and you breathe. Ideally you want the exhale being longer than the inhale. That's more of a longer breath, that's more of a relaxation breath, it's a calming breath. So just in terms of excitability of the nervous system, it's going to calm that excitability down, so it'll allow muscles to lengthen out to a good resting position or a good set position. So you definitely want to be doing that. And then if you know which asana you're in, so for example, if you're in bridge, and on the bridge you kind of tuck and roll up into bridge, and you're pushing your hips up, and you're digging your heels onto the floor, and you're squeezing your butt muscle, so you're going to engage the butt muscle to kind of lift you up into bridge. which is quite normal. That lifting of you up into bridge, that's going to then create that opening of the hips on the front. And the hip opening is the reciprocal inhibition happening because the glutes are engaged. It's going to be relaxing the hip flexors on the front. So you're going to get this opening of the hips, stretching of the abdominals in a very neurological way. But if you just kind of come to that bridge and just kind of push into the feet, but you're not really activating the glute muscles, you're not going to get that neurological kind of conditioning. And so you're kind of probably going to miss out on a big benefit of that practice. You can still do it, but you're kind of just like more mechanically just jamming you up, and you're just closing the joint spaces down and resting on the joints. And that's not really ideal because the joints want a combination of the structural integrity of the skeletal structure, plus the ligamentous structure, plus the connective structure, plus the muscles stabilizing the joint. You want all those working together. If the muscles aren't really engaged in position, most of the loading and pressure comes into the actual joint itself, which is not ideal. So that's definitely something you want to be doing. If you're in positions where that you're weight bearing, so like you're in Warrior 1, okay, because you're weight bearing, there's going to be this dual autogenic kind of contracting tension muscle, but at the same time it's lengthening. So when a muscle lengthens on the tension, that's called an eccentric contraction. So you can have a muscle contracting and lengthening at the same time, and that's one way we actually develop a lot of strength. And you're going to get that autogenic kind of feeling in the muscle. So you're in that Warrior 1, you're sinking that rear knee down a little bit, you're getting that beautiful stretch at the front of the hip. That's the rectus femoris getting lengthened on the tension eccentrically, and so you're going to get that autogenic kind of reflex happening where it's sensing the tension and it's allowing the muscle to lengthen autogenically under control. All right. So if you go too quickly, too far, you might tighten up and you might feel like it's stopping you and you can't go down as deep. So that's why we need to take our time, breathe, and just sink down into our stretch. And the body will essentially allow you to go to a position of control and safety. So we're not trying to force our body into a position it doesn't want to go into, because neurologically it's going to say, you know what, no, and it'll try to stop you from doing that. Okay, so that's a brief introduction into reciprocal inhibition. I hope you guys enjoyed that. If you have any questions, you can definitely shoot me a message. I'm always happy to answer any questions. Okay. Way you can support the channel as we build it up and share this knowledge is you can do all the like and subscribes and hit the bells and all those kind of things. You can leave comments. You can head over to my website here. I teach yoga anatomy courses once a month online. We're doing a module once a month, so you can jump on there, and whatever module we're up to when you view this video, you can jump onto that and join in. Or you can just drop me some thoughts in the comments below and any questions you might have, and I'm happy to answer them for you. In the meantime, stay into practice, keep turning up onto the mat, and enjoy your training and your practice.